Mrs. Caldwell, is that really you? Elvis Presley's voice trembled as he stared at the 71-year-old supermarket cashier whose hands were shaking while counting food stamps. The woman looked up, and for a moment, time stopped. It was her Rose Caldwell, his beloved first-grade teacher who had taught him to read, who had first told him he had a gift for music, who had believed in a poor boy from Tupelo when nobody else would. But now she was here, wearing a grocery store uniform, living on food stamps, working minimum wage just to survive. Elvis, little Elvis Presley, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears of recognition and shame. In that moment, Elvis realized that America had forgotten the very woman who helped create its biggest star. But to understand how the king of rock and roll ended up face to face with his childhood teacher in a Memphis grocery store, and why what happened next would remain secret for over 40 years, you need to know about the woman who saw greatness in a shy little boy when everyone else saw just another poor kid from Mississippi. It was October 15, 1974. Elvis had driven himself to Kroger on Highway 51 South, wanting some normalcy in his increasingly complicated life. He'd been struggling with his health, his marriage was falling apart, and the pressures of fame were crushing him. Sometimes he just needed to do ordinary things like buying groceries to feel human again. The store was nearly empty at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Elvis grabbed a cart and started walking through the aisles, enjoying the rare moment of anonymity his sunglasses and casual clothes provided. He was picking out bread when he heard a familiar sound, the distinct rhythm of someone counting very carefully, the way you do when every penny matters. At checkout line 3, he saw her, an elderly woman in a store uniform, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, carefully counting government assistance vouchers, while a young mother with 2 children waited impatiently behind her. The cashier was apologizing quietly. "I'm sorry, I just need to make sure I have enough." Something about her voice made Elvis's heart skip. It was a voice he knew, a voice that had read him stories, that had patiently taught him letters and numbers, that had said, "You're going to do great things someday, Elvis," when he was just 6 years old and couldn't imagine being anything but poor. He moved closer, hardly daring to believe what his eyes were telling him. The nameplate on her uniform read, Rose, the same Rose who had changed his life 40 years ago. Mrs. Rose Caldwell had been 28 years old when Elvis first walked into her classroom at East Tupelo Consolidated School in 1941. He was 6, painfully shy, and desperately poor. His clothes were hand-me-downs that didn't fit, his shoes had holes, and he spoke so quietly that most people assumed he wasn't very bright. But Rose Caldwell saw something different. She saw the way his eyes lit up during story time. She noticed how he hummed little melodies under his breath when he thought no one was listening. Most importantly, she saw that beneath his shyness was a child who was hungry to learn, hungry to be somebody. "Elvis," she would say, "you have music in your soul. Don't you ever let anyone tell you that's not special." She was the first person to put a book in his hands and make him believe he could read it. She was the one who noticed he had perfect pitch when he sang Old Shep during show and tell. And when other kids made fun of his clothes or his accent, Mrs. Caldwell would pull him aside and whisper, "The best diamonds come from the deepest pressure, Elvis. Remember that." Now, 33 years later, that diamond stood frozen in a grocery store, watching his first teacher count food stamps. "Mrs. Caldwell, is that really you?" Elvis whispered, his voice breaking. Rose looked up, and for a moment, confusion crossed her weathered features. Then recognition dawned, followed immediately by a flush of shame that broke Elvis's heart. "Elvis, little Elvis Presley," her voice was barely audible. "Oh my goodness, I didn't expect," the young mother behind her huffed impatiently. "Excuse me, are you going to finish or not? Some of us have places to be." Elvis turned to look at the woman, and something in his expression made her step back. Without saying a word, he walked to her cart, pulled out his wallet, and handed her a $100 bill. "Your groceries are on me today," he said quietly. "And Mrs. Caldwell's too. Take your time, ma'am." The woman's attitude changed instantly when she realized who he was, but Elvis had already turned back to his teacher. Rose was staring at him with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry you had to see me like this," she whispered. I'm so proud of what you became, but I never wanted you to know that Mrs. Caldwell," Elvis said gently. "There's nothing for you to be sorry about, nothing at all." But as he looked at her more closely, Elvis could see the signs he'd learned to recognize from his own mother's struggles. The carefully mended uniform, the thin frame that suggested she wasn't eating enough, the embarrassment of someone who had once been respected trying to maintain dignity while living in poverty. "How long have you been working here?" he asked softly. Rose wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. "About 6 months now. After I retired from teaching, my pension, well, it wasn't enough. And when the medical bills started piling up," she trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Medical bills? Oh, it's nothing serious," she said quickly, but Elvis could see she was lying. "Just the usual things that happen when you get old. Nothing I can't handle." Elvis felt something burning in his chest. A combination of love, gratitude, and pure rage at a system that could throw away a woman like Rose Caldwell. This was the person who had seen potential in a nobody from Tupelo. This was the teacher who had stayed after school to help him with his reading when other adults had written him off. This was the woman who had planted the seeds of confidence that had grown into everything he'd become, and America had forgotten her. "Mrs. Caldwell," Elvis said, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. "Would you like to have coffee with me? After your shift? I'd love to catch up." Rose hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to see her former student and feeling ashamed of her circumstances. I don't know if that's appropriate. You're Elvis Presley, and You're my teacher," Elvis interrupted firmly. "You'll always be my teacher, and teachers deserve respect." Something in his tone convinced her. "I get off at 4, she said quietly. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 4. As Elvis left the store, his mind was already working. But first, he needed to know exactly what Rose Caldwell's situation was, and he knew just the person to help him find out. Joe Esposito had been Elvis's road manager and closest friend for over a decade. If anyone could quietly investigate someone's circumstances without attracting attention, it was Joe. That evening, Elvis called him to Graceland. "I need you to do something for me," Elvis said, pacing around his living room, "and I need it done quietly." "Of course, Elvis. What do you need?" "There's a woman named Rose Caldwell. She works at the Piggly Wiggly on Elvis Presley Boulevard. She used to be my teacher. I want to know everything about her situation, her finances, her health, her living arrangements, everything. But she can't know we're looking into it." Joe nodded. "I can have that information for you by tomorrow morning." "Good. And Joe, this stays between us. Nobody else needs to know about this." The next morning, Joe arrived at Graceland with a folder that made Elvis's stomach turn. Rose Caldwell, who had dedicated 45 years of her life to educating children, was living in a situation that bordered on desperate. Her teacher's pension was only $127 a month, barely enough to cover basic utilities. She was living in a tiny efficiency apartment in a rundown part of Memphis, paying $65 a month in rent. She'd been diagnosed with diabetes the year before, and her medical expenses were eating up most of her grocery store wages. She had no family, never married, no children of her own, and had been too proud to ask her former colleagues for help. Most heartbreaking of all, Joe had discovered that Rose had been selling her possessions, including gifts from former students, to pay for her insulin and medical care. "She's got maybe 2 weeks before she gets evicted," Joe reported grimly. "And if she loses her apartment, she'll probably lose her job too. No address, no way to get to work." Elvis sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the folder. Then he looked up at Joe with an expression of absolute determination. "Here's what we're going to do," he said. "And we're going to do it in a way that she never ever knows it came from me." What Elvis orchestrated over the next several weeks was a masterpiece of secret generosity that would require careful planning, multiple intermediaries, and absolute discretion. Working through Joe and a network of lawyers and accountants he trusted implicitly, Elvis created what appeared to be a series of completely unrelated lucky breaks for Rose Caldwell. But first, Elvis needed to understand exactly how the education system had failed someone as valuable as Rose Caldwell. The research Joe conducted revealed a heartbreaking pattern that was repeated across the country. Teachers who had dedicated their entire lives to educating children were retiring into poverty because their pensions had never been designed to keep up with the cost of living. Rose's situation was particularly tragic because she represented everything that was right about education. Former colleagues described her as the kind of teacher who stayed after school to help struggling students, who spent her own money on classroom supplies, who never missed a day even when she was sick herself. She had taught during the Great Depression, World War II, and the social upheaval of the 1960s, adapting her methods but never wavering in her commitment to her students. She was the kind of teacher who could take a kid who'd been written off by everyone else and make them believe they could succeed. One former principal told Joe during his investigation, "I must have seen her work miracles with hundreds of children over the years. It's a crime that she's struggling now." Elvis learned that Rose had actually turned down several opportunities to leave teaching for higher-paying jobs. In the 1950s, she'd been offered a position with the Memphis School District Administration that would have doubled her salary, but she'd declined because it would have meant leaving the classroom. She'd chosen teaching over money her entire career, and now she was paying the price. This information only strengthened Elvis's resolve to help her, but it also made him realize that Rose's situation wasn't unique. How many other teachers were struggling in silence? How many other educators who had shaped young minds were now counting food stamps and facing eviction? Elvis made a decision that would remain secret for decades. He wasn't just going to help Rose Caldwell, he was going to create a system to help retired teachers across the Memphis area, and Rose would be his test case to make sure it worked perfectly. First, she received a letter informing her that she'd been selected for a Veteran Teacher Appreciation Scholarship, a program that Elvis had invented and funded entirely himself. The letter, written on official-looking letterhead from something called the American Education Legacy Foundation, explained that Rose had been nominated by former colleagues for her exceptional service to children's education over 4 decades. The scholarship came with a monthly stipend of $500, supposedly from an endowment that honored longtime educators who had made exceptional contributions to their communities. The letter was carefully crafted to sound legitimate, mentioning specific details about Rose's teaching career that Elvis had Joe research: her perfect attendance record, her volunteer work with struggling readers, her reputation for believing in every child. "We are honored to recognize your dedication to education," the letter read. "This monthly stipend is our way of ensuring that teachers like you can enjoy the retirement you've earned after a lifetime of service to America's children." Rose read the letter 3 times before she could believe it was real. She called the phone number listed, and a professional-sounding woman, actually an actress Elvis had hired through his connections in Las Vegas, confirmed that yes, Rose Caldwell had indeed been selected for this honor. A week later, Rose got a call from her doctor's office that left her in tears of relief. An anonymous benefactor had contacted the medical center and paid all of her outstanding medical bills, over $3,000 in diabetes care, routine checkups, and prescription costs. More incredibly, they had established an account to cover all of her future medical expenses. "We can't tell you who it is," the office manager explained when Rose pressed for details. "They specifically requested anonymity. All we can say is that it's someone who has great respect for teachers and wanted to make sure you get the health care you deserve." The timing seemed miraculous to Rose, but it was actually the result of careful planning by Elvis and Joe. They had spent days figuring out exactly how to structure the payment so that it couldn't be traced back to Elvis, using a series of charitable foundations and intermediary organizations to obscure the source. Then came the housing solution, which required Elvis's most creative thinking. Rose received a visit from a well-dressed woman who introduced herself as Margaret Thompson from Premier Property Management. Miss Thompson explained that her company managed properties for wealthy clients who traveled frequently and needed responsible house sitters. "We have a client who owns a lovely little home in the Cooper Young area," Miss Thompson explained, showing Rose photographs of a charming 2-bedroom house with a front porch and a garden. "He's often away on business and would prefer to have someone living there rather than leaving it empty. The arrangement would include a very reasonable rent porch, just $50 a month to cover basic utilities. And you'd be helping us by keeping the property occupied and maintained." The house, of course, had been quietly purchased by Elvis through a shell corporation. Joe had spent weeks finding the perfect property, something comfortable and dignified, but not so luxurious that Rose would become suspicious. The house was in a safe neighborhood with good public transportation, close to a pharmacy where Rose could easily fill her prescriptions. But Elvis's most ingenious move was yet to come. He arranged for Rose to receive a letter from Dr. Harold Mackenzie, the superintendent of Memphis City Schools, informing her that the district was implementing a new program to honor retired teachers and tap into their experience. The Memphis Education Legacy Project, the letter explained, is designed to connect retired teachers with current educators who can benefit from your decades of classroom experience. "We would like to hire you as an educational consultant, visiting schools once or twice a week to mentor new teachers and share your expertise with young educators who are just beginning their careers. The position," the letter continued, "would pay $350 a month and would allow Rose to work flexible hours based on her availability and interests." It was, Elvis thought, the perfect solution. It would give Rose meaningful work that honored her expertise while providing her with additional income, and it would allow her to quit the grocery store job that he knew was both physically exhausting and emotionally humiliating for her. Dr. Mackenzie, who had been approached through mutual contacts and believed the program was being funded by a combination of federal grants and private donations, was genuinely enthusiastic about the idea. When he met with Rose to discuss the position, his excitement about having someone of her experience and reputation working with young teachers was completely authentic. Every single aspect of Rose's miraculous turnaround had been carefully orchestrated by Elvis, but it was done so smoothly, and through so many intermediaries that Rose never suspected. To her it seemed like a series of wonderful coincidences, proof that sometimes the universe does reward good people who have spent their lives serving others. Elvis watched it all from a distance, checking on Rose's progress through Joe's discreet inquiries and occasional drive-bys to see her working in her new garden or walking to the neighborhood pharmacy. But he was careful never to approach her directly. He knew that if she ever suspected the truth, her pride would force her to refuse the help, and he couldn't bear the thought of her returning to that struggle. The transformation in Rose's life was immediate and profound. Within 2 months of that chance encounter at the grocery store, she had gone from counting food stamps to living with dignity and purpose. She had moved into her new house, decorated it with plants and the teaching mementos she had been forced to pack away in her tiny efficiency apartment, and begun her work with the Memphis Education Legacy Project. The young teachers Rose mentored were amazed by her energy and insight. At 71, she had more enthusiasm for education than many people half her age. She would arrive at schools with a briefcase full of teaching materials she had collected over 4 decades, ready to share not just techniques and strategies but stories about the joy of watching children discover their own potential. "Mrs. Caldwell has this way of talking about teaching that reminds you why you became a teacher in the first place," said Jennifer Martinez, a first-year teacher at Humes Elementary who worked with Rose regularly. "She doesn't just teach you how to manage a classroom or create lesson plans. She teaches you how to see the spark in every child, even the ones who seem impossible to reach." Rose's favorite part of her new role was working with teachers who were struggling with difficult students. She would tell them about Elvis Presley, not the superstar, but the shy, poor little boy who had sat in the back of her classroom and barely spoke above a whisper. "I had this student once," she would say, never revealing his identity, "who came to school in clothes that didn't fit, who was so quiet I wasn't sure he was learning anything at all. Other teachers thought he wasn't very bright. But I could see something in his eyes during story time, something that told me he was taking in every word. I made sure to call on him gently, to praise him when he answered correctly, to let him know I believed in him. That little boy grew up to do extraordinary things, and I learned that sometimes the children who seem the most unreachable are just waiting for someone to show them they're worth reaching. The teachers she mentored had no idea that the student she was describing was Elvis Presley, but they understood her message. Every child deserves someone who believes in their potential. Meanwhile, Elvis had begun expanding his secret teacher assistance program. Using the lessons he'd learned from helping Rose, he quietly established a network of support for retired educators throughout the Memphis area. He funded a foundation that provided emergency financial assistance to teachers facing medical crises, helped establish a program that offered temporary housing for educators who had lost their homes, and created scholarship funds for young people who wanted to become teachers but couldn't afford college. All of this work was done through intermediaries and shell corporations, with lawyers and accountants ensuring that Elvis's name never appeared on any documents. To the outside world, it appeared that Memphis had suddenly become home to several generous philanthropists who cared deeply about education. Only Joe Esposito and a few trusted advisors knew that all of these programs traced back to one man's gratitude to his first-grade teacher. Instead, Elvis found other ways to stay connected to his teacher and to honor what she represented. He started making anonymous donations to educational causes throughout the South, always specifying that the money should be used to help retired teachers or to improve conditions for current educators. He funded scholarship programs at multiple universities for students who wanted to become teachers, and he quietly paid for medical care and living expenses for dozens of other elderly educators who were struggling to make ends meet. But his most meaningful gesture was one that Rose never knew about. Elvis began visiting elementary schools throughout Memphis, not as Elvis Presley the superstar, but as a man who wanted to read to children and encourage their love of learning. He would arrange these visits through Joe, who would contact schools and offer the services of an anonymous benefactor who wanted to support literacy programs. Teachers and administrators who met with Elvis during these visits knew him only as Mr. Aaron, a wealthy Memphis businessman who cared about education. They had no idea they were meeting the king of rock and roll, because Elvis was careful to dress simply and speak quietly, transforming himself back into the shy boy who had once sat in Rose Caldwell's classroom. During these school visits, Elvis would read stories to children, help them with their letters, and tell them the same thing Rose had once told him: you all have something special inside you. Don't let anyone tell you different. Rose Caldwell lived the last 3 years of her life in comfort and dignity, surrounded by the respect she'd always deserved but had been denied during her retirement. She became something of a local celebrity in Memphis educational circles, known not just for her stories about the old days of teaching, but for her continued passion for helping young educators discover the joy and importance of their profession. She rented a small plot in a community garden where she grew vegetables that she shared with her neighbors. She joined a book club at the local library and became known for her insightful discussions about literature. She volunteered at a literacy program for adults who had never learned to read, using the same patience and encouragement that had made her such an effective teacher with children. Most importantly, she regained the sense of dignity and purpose that poverty had threatened to steal from her. The monthly payments from the American Education Legacy Foundation, combined with her salary from the Memphis Education Legacy Project, allowed her to live comfortably without counting every penny or worrying about whether she could afford her medication. She never knew that her most famous student was watching over her, ensuring that she could live her final years with the respect and security that her decades of service had earned. Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep in March of 1977, just 5 months before Elvis himself would die. She had been working in her garden that afternoon, planting flowers for the spring, and had seemed happy and healthy. That evening she had dinner with a neighbor, watched her favorite television show, and gone to bed with a book, the same routine she had followed for the past 2 years in her comfortable little house. At her funeral, The First Baptist Church of Memphis was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Former students, now adults with children of their own, came from across the country to pay their respects. Fellow teachers, both retired and current, filled the pews. The young educators she had mentored through the Memphis Education Legacy Project served as pallbearers, honored to carry their mentor to her final rest. Elvis attended the service, sitting in the back row wearing dark sunglasses and a simple black suit that helped him blend into the crowd. He listened as person after person stood up to talk about how Rose Caldwell had believed in them, how she had seen potential where others saw problems, how she had changed their lives with her patience and kindness. A former principal spoke about Rose's dedication during the difficult years of school integration in the 1960s, when she had insisted that every child in her classroom, regardless of race, deserved the same high expectations and encouragement. A student she had taught in 1952 talked about how Mrs. Caldwell had visited her family during a difficult time, bringing not just homework but groceries and encouragement. Another former student, now a successful business owner, credited Rose with teaching him that success isn't about what you achieve for yourself, it's about what you do to help others achieve their dreams. Rose Caldwell lived the last 3 years of her life in comfort and dignity, surrounded by the respect she'd always deserved. She became something of a local celebrity in Memphis educational circles, known for her stories about the old days of teaching and her unwavering belief that every child had potential. She never knew that her most famous student was watching over her. Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep in March of 1977, just 5 months before Elvis himself would die. At her funeral, the church was packed with former students, fellow teachers and community members whose lives she had touched. Elvis attended the service, sitting in the back row wearing dark sunglasses and a simple black suit. He listened as person after person stood up to talk about how Rose Caldwell had believed in them, how she had seen potential where others saw problems, how she had changed their lives with her patience and kindness. When it was over, Elvis walked to the front of the church and placed a single red rose on her casket. Attached was a small card that read simply, "Thank you for teaching me to read and for teaching me to believe. Your student always, Elvis." The mourners were surprised to see Elvis Presley at the service, but many assumed he was there because Rose had been a long-time Memphis educator, and Elvis was known for supporting local causes. They had no idea that they were witnessing the final moment of a secret relationship that had lasted 3 years and had transformed not just Rose's life, but the lives of hundreds of other retired teachers throughout the South. Dr. Mackenzie, the school superintendent who had worked with Rose through the Memphis Education Legacy Project, approached Elvis after the service. "Mr. Presley," he said, "I wanted to thank you for coming today. Mrs. Caldwell spoke about you often during her work with our young teachers. She always said you were a special student, someone who proved that teachers should never give up on any child. I think she would be pleased to know that you remembered her." Elvis nodded, his eyes still hidden behind sunglasses. "She was a good teacher," he said quietly. "The best." What Dr. Mackenzie didn't know, and what wouldn't be discovered for another 20 years, was that Elvis had been the secret force behind every program that had brought dignity and purpose back to Rose Caldwell's final years. The Memphis Education Legacy Project that had given Rose such joy in her retirement, funded entirely by Elvis. The American Education Legacy Foundation that had provided her monthly stipend, a creation of Elvis's financial team. Even the community garden where Rose had grown her vegetables had been supported by anonymous donations from Elvis Presley Enterprises. The story of Elvis's secret care for his teacher remained hidden for decades, locked away in financial records and legal documents that were sealed until the 1990s. It was only discovered when researchers going through Elvis's estate papers found the extensive paper trail of his elaborate scheme to help Rose Caldwell and dozens of other retired teachers throughout the South. The revelations were staggering. Between 1974 and 1977, Elvis had quietly spent over $2 million, equivalent to more than $10 million in today's money, on programs to support retired teachers. He had funded medical care for elderly educators who couldn't afford their medications. He had prevented evictions and foreclosures for teachers who were facing homelessness. He had established scholarship programs at 7 different universities to encourage young people to enter the teaching profession. And all of it had been done in secret, with layers of legal protection, ensuring that the recipients never knew where their help was coming from. Joe Esposito, who had helped orchestrate the entire operation, was interviewed about it years later. By then, both Elvis and Rose were gone, but Joe's memories of those years were vivid and emotional. "I never saw Elvis happier than during those months when he was secretly taking care of Mrs. Caldwell," Joe explained. "It wasn't about the money for Elvis Haas. He spent millions on cars and jewelry and houses without thinking twice about it. This was different. This was about giving back to someone who had given him something priceless when he was just a poor kid who didn't believe in himself." Joe described the elaborate lengths Elvis went to in order to maintain the secret. He would drive past Rose's house late at night, just to make sure she was safe. He would have Joe check with her doctors to ensure she was getting good care. When Rose mentioned to a neighbor that she was worried about affording winter heating bills, Elvis anonymously arranged for the utility company to receive a prepayment that would cover her heating costs for the next 5 years. Elvis understood that if Mrs. Caldwell ever found out it was him helping her, she would have been too proud to accept it.
Joe said.
So he made sure she never knew. But he also made sure she never wanted for anything again. In Elvis's mind, it was the least he could do for the person who had taught him to read and, more importantly, had taught him to believe he could be something special. The researchers who uncovered Elvis's secret teacher assistance programs were amazed by their scope and sophistication. Dr. Patricia Williams, an education historian who studied the documents extensively, called Elvis's work one of the most comprehensive and thoughtful philanthropic efforts in American education history. What Elvis created wasn't just charity, Dr. Williams explained. He designed sustainable programs that restored dignity to retired teachers while also creating systems to help future educators. The Memphis Education Legacy Project, for example, didn't just give Rose Caldwell meaningful work. It created a mentorship program that helped dozens of young teachers become more effective educators. That program is still running today, 40 years later, and it has impacted thousands of students. Dr. Williams also noted the careful psychology behind Elvis's approach. He understood that people like Rose Caldwell weren't looking for handouts, they were looking for respect and purpose. So he created opportunities that honored their expertise while providing the financial support they needed. It was brilliant in its empathy and understanding of human dignity. The house that Elvis bought for Rose still stands in Memphis today, in the Cooper Young neighborhood that has become one of the city's most vibrant communities. After her death, Elvis's estate donated the house to a non-profit organization that provides affordable housing for retired teachers. Over the decades, it has been home to more than 24 educators who needed safe, affordable housing in their retirement years. A small plaque by the front door, installed in 1995 when Elvis's role in the house's history was finally revealed, reads, "In memory of Rose Caldwell and all the teachers who plant seeds of greatness in the hearts of children. This house stands as a reminder that we must never forget those who shaped us." The current resident of the house is Margaret Foster, a 73-year-old retired third-grade teacher who taught for 42 years in the Memphis school system. She knows the history of her home and considers herself a guardian of both Rose's legacy and Elvis's secret generosity. "I think about them both every day," Margaret said in a recent interview. "Mrs. Caldwell, who I never met but who I feel like I know through the stories, and Elvis, who could have forgotten all about his old teacher, but instead spent years making sure she was taken care of. It reminds me that we're all connected, that the children we teach today might grow up to be the people who take care of us tomorrow." Margaret has continued Rose's tradition of working with young teachers, volunteering with the Memphis Education Legacy Project that Elvis established and that continues to thrive decades after his death. She often tells the story of Elvis and Rose to new teachers, using it as an example of the long-term impact that educators can have on their students. "Sometimes you plant a seed in a child, and you never know what's going to grow from it," she tells them. Rose Caldwell planted a seed in Elvis Presley when he was 6 years old, and 40 years later, that seed grew into a lifetime of care and support for teachers like us. That's the power we have as educators. We never know which of our students might grow up to change the world, or which one might remember us when we need it most. The story of Elvis and Mrs. Caldwell has become a powerful teaching tool in education schools across the country. It's used to illustrate the importance of seeing potential in every student, but also to highlight the often overlooked reality of teacher poverty and the need for society to better support its educators. Professor James Martinez at the University of Memphis Education School uses the story in his teacher preparation courses, but he's careful to emphasize both sides of its message. The story of Elvis helping his teacher is beautiful and inspiring, Professor Martinez tells his students. But we can't rely on our former students becoming superstars who can afford to secretly take care of us. The real lesson here is that a society that values education needs to create systems that ensure teachers can retire with dignity. Elvis did for Rose Caldwell what our country should be doing for all of our educators. The story also serves as a reminder of the complex relationships between students and teachers, and the ways those relationships can continue to evolve long after graduation. Dr. Sarah Johnson, a child psychologist who has studied teacher-student bonds, points to the Elvis-Rose relationship as an example of how positive early educational experiences can create lifelong gratitude and connection. What's remarkable about Elvis's care for Mrs. Caldwell is that it shows how deeply formative those early teacher-student relationships can be, Dr. Johnson explains. Rose Caldwell didn't just teach Elvis to read message, she taught him that adults could believe in him, that he had value, that his potential mattered. When he had the power to give back, he remembered not just what she taught him but how she made him feel about himself. Today, the various programs that Elvis established to help retired teachers continue to operate throughout the South. The American Education Legacy Foundation, which began as Elvis's invented scholarship program for Rose, now provides support to hundreds of retired teachers each year. The foundation's mission statement, written shortly before Elvis's death, reflects his understanding of what teachers truly need. We believe that educators who have dedicated their lives to nurturing young minds deserve to live their retirement years with dignity, respect, and security. We also believe that the wisdom and experience of veteran teachers should be honored and utilized to help prepare the next generation of educators. Our programs are designed not just to provide financial support, but to ensure that retired teachers remain valued members of their communities and continue to contribute to the education of children. The Foundation's current executive director, Dr. Linda Thompson, worked as a young teacher with Rose Caldwell during her final years and witnessed firsthand the transformation in Rose's life and purpose. Mrs. Caldwell used to joke that she had won the lottery 3 times in 1 year, Dr. Thompson recalls. First the scholarship, then the medical help, then the job with the Legacy Project. She never knew it was all the same lottery ticket, signed by Elvis Presley, but I think she would have been pleased to know that her story became the model for helping thousands of other teachers. The Memphis Education Legacy Project that gave Rose such purpose in her final years has become one of the most successful teacher mentorship programs in the country. It has been replicated in dozens of other cities, always with the same core principle that Elvis understood: retired teachers are not just people who need help, but resources whose knowledge and experience should be valued and utilized. Current Memphis School Superintendent Dr. Robert Clark, who wasn't born when Rose Caldwell worked with the project, still sees evidence of her influence in the district's culture. We have teachers in our system today who were mentored by teachers who were mentored by Rose Caldwell, Dr. Clark explains. There's a direct line from her classroom in the 1940s to classrooms today, where teachers are still using strategies and approaches that she developed and passed down. That's the real measure of a teacher's impact, not just the students you taught directly, but the students who are taught by the teachers you inspired. The story of Elvis Presley and Rose Caldwell reminds us that success means nothing if we forget the people who helped us achieve it. It shows us that real generosity isn't about getting credit or recognition. It's about quietly making sure that the people who deserve dignity get to keep it. And it proves that sometimes the most important lessons we learn in school aren't about reading or writing or arithmetic. Sometimes they're about recognizing the value in others, about believing in potential even when it's hidden, and about never forgetting to honor the teachers who saw greatness in us when we couldn't see it in ourselves. In a world that often seems to have forgotten the value of education and the importance of teachers, the story of Elvis Presley and Rose Caldwell stands as a powerful reminder that every teacher plants seeds of possibility in young minds. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, those seeds grow into something that can give back. Mrs. Caldwell taught Elvis to read, but more importantly, she taught him to believe. And when he had the power to return that gift, Elvis proved that he had learned her most important lesson of all, that true greatness lies not in what we achieve for ourselves, but in what we do to lift others up. Somewhere in Memphis today, there's a classroom full of children learning to read. And if you listen carefully, you might just hear an echo of Mrs. Rose Caldwell's voice, telling them the same thing she once told a shy little boy from Tupelo. You have something special inside you. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different. Because sometimes that's all it takes to change the world. The legacy of Elvis and Rose's relationship extends far beyond Memphis, inspiring education advocates and philanthropists across the country to create programs that support retired teachers. The National Education Association now presents an annual Rose Caldwell Award to individuals who work to improve conditions for retired educators, though few recipients know the full story behind the award's namesake. In schools throughout America, teachers tell their students about the importance of remembering those who helped them succeed. They may not always mention Elvis and Rose by name, but they share the same message that Rose taught Elvis all those years ago, that believing in someone's potential can change their life forever, and that gratitude should inspire us to help others when we have the power to do so. And in Memphis, on Elvis Presley Boulevard, not far from Graceland, there stands a small elementary school that was built with funds from the Elvis Presley Charitable Foundation. Above the entrance to the Rose Caldwell Memorial Library, carved in stone, are these words: "A teacher affects eternity." They never know where their influence stops. It's a fitting tribute to a woman who saw greatness in a poor boy from Tupelo, and to the man who never forgot what she taught him about the power of believing in others. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about, not just the kindness of one man to his teacher, but the endless chain of influence that connects us all, and the responsibility we have to honor those who helped us become who we are. Sometimes the most important lessons happen long after school ends. And sometimes the greatest teachers are the ones who teach us not just facts and figures, but how to see the potential in ourselves and others. Rose Caldwell did both, and in doing so she created a legacy that continues to touch lives more than half a century after Elvis Presley walked into her classroom. That legacy lives on in every teacher who believes in a struggling student, in every student who grows up to help their community, and in every act of secret generosity that happens because someone remembered what it felt like to be believed in when they needed it most. Mrs. Caldwell would be proud.